Hayley Chewins, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I should note for esteemed audience who watches on YouTube, and all of esteemed audience, even if they're not watching on YouTube, should be subscribed on YouTube. Come on, man, this is a free show. Help me out. But we are talking with a time difference. So I'm talking to you in Johannesburg. I, of course, am in the fine Hoosier state of Indiana. So because of that time difference, I'm in my wife's office. So those of you watching on YouTube, the background's a bit different than normal. And I'm also in a very squeaky desk chair. So I'm going to apologize at the top of the interview for the squeaking that you may or may not be enjoying throughout. Well, enough preamble. I'm very excited to talk to you, Hayley. The best place probably to get started is I never summarize other people's biographies or other people's books because I make a mess of both. So to avoid that risk, I'm just going to ask you to begin by giving esteemed audience an overview of your background.
Sure. So my name is Hayley Chewins. I'm an author. I write middle grade fantasy books that are kind of on the upper end of middle grade and the darker end of middle grade. And I also am a writing coach. I help writers to write more intuitively and to kind of trust their intuition in their writing and to move past any blocks that they might have. And I also just launched my first online writing course, which is called 100 Ideas in 10 Days. And yeah, it's basically a course that will help you to generate and develop ideas through 10 really fun exercises. And it's all about play and like getting to know yourself as a writer and getting in touch with your own voice. And yeah, that's what I do.
That's just lots to break down and unpack. We were talking just before we got started about what motivates us to write, and I think we both agreed it's not money. And I told you to hold that thought because I don't want to waste something this good off air. My God, let's share this with the esteemed audience. So, what is it that motivates you to write?
Oh, well, I mean, language chiefly, and story. So I've always been fascinated by language and just fascinated by words and their meanings and also their sound and their musicality. So I love just playing with language. And when I discovered that I could kind of play with language and also play with character and worlds that I could invent from scratch and plot and like plot twists and secrets. That's just the most fun thing that I could ever do with my time. So that's kind of, yeah, that's what drives me.
It's just the joy of creating your fun worlds.
Yeah, exactly. The joy of language, the joy of story, the joy of discovering a story kind of like it's almost sometimes like watching a story develop in your mind or just seeing it become a story. Spending time with it, spending time with the characters, figuring things out. Because writing a novel can sometimes feel like you're solving one problem after another, but it's like really fun problems that you get to solve. And yeah, I just really enjoy invention and play, and especially word play and play with like the sound and the meaning of language.
That sounds like nothing but positives to me. So what's since I know that can't possibly be so, we don't live in that world. What's the downside of writing? What's your least favorite thing?
What is my least favorite thing? It's really hard actually because there aren't many. Like I was talking to someone the other day, and I was telling her how long it takes to write a book and how many stages there are to drafting and revising and editing. And she said to me, "How do you stick in there for so long? Like, how do you do it?" And my honest answer is like, because I enjoy every aspect of that process. I love reading the same sentence like 200 times to get the cadence right, and I love figuring out plot problems. I love brainstorming. I love drafting, and I draft very intuitively. So I love it when I kind of am having. I'm like kind of in the flow, and then something happens in a scene that I didn't expect. Like I imagine that the characters are going to have a conversation about one thing, and then one of them says something I didn't expect them to say, or someone like walks through the door. I didn't expect to walk through the door, and that's like so fun to me. I love that. I guess what I would say is like the thing that maybe is my worst thing is if I'm having a bad writing day in the sense that I can't get into that flow, or I just feel kind of maybe I have like overwhelming self-doubt, or I get bogged down in, not being able to kind of have the confidence and the feeling that I can hold a whole story in my head at one time, and that all the little pieces are going to work together at the end. It takes a lot of trust over, a period of maybe a year or 2 years or 3 years to kind of trust, like, one day I will figure this out, because I'm also not an outlining kind of a person. I try, because I imagine that outlining is, well, I guess maybe my fantasy is that if I were a writer who outlined, that writing would be easier. So I've tried to outline, but I always have to go back. Like, I'll do an outline and then I start drafting, and something happens in the actual act of writing, in the prose, that I didn't plan in my outline, that changes everything. And so I forgot my point. But yeah, I think that the hardest thing is just when you're having a bad day and you don't actually have the feeling that it's going well, and you maybe, and sometimes I doubt that I can get something right, or that I can actually figure something out, and that can be quite hard.
That makes a whole lot of sense to me, and certainly very identifiable, I would imagine, for everyone listening. I don't think there's a writer out there that never has to deal with self-doubt, but if you are out there, good for you, huh? How nice is your life? No hate for me. You go. You be happy. That's fantastic. I wanted to ask a little bit about writing intuitively, because some people could do it really well. I'm not one of them, although I aspire to be one. Are we talking you don't have any kind of outline? Do you at least have some idea of where the ending is, some kind of goal that you're getting to?
I never know endings. I can't. I wish I knew the ending. I can't possibly figure out an ending when I start a book. I just can't. But I do have a couple of things. I have usually the character, the situation that they're in right in the beginning of the story, what kind of world they're in, not in granular detail, but in a broad sense. And I kind of usually have a sense of the catalyst moment. The thing that really changes everything and kind of launches the character into the second act of the book. I do like thinking about structure in broad strokes. So I like thinking about, the first act, the second act, the third act. And I think in order to write intuitively, you do need to have a sense of how stories work broadly. Because if you don't have that, you can go off on all sorts of tangents, and it's not very fun for a reader to read a story that doesn't have some kind of structure. But having said that, I also don't hold myself to any structure in the beginning. I might have an idea of what's happening in the beginning and what this catalyst moment is going to be. But if it changes in the writing, I allow for that. I actually allow for anything to happen in the writing. I kind of write as though I'm dreaming. So if the characters are, at one point, I don't know, if I find that the characters are suddenly underwater, I'll just go with it, like, even if they weren't underwater before. And obviously, through revisions, I have to find, if I want to keep the underwater stuff, I need to figure out why these characters are underwater. Like, I need to have a reason for it. But in the first, second, third draft, when I'm still trying to figure out the characters, what motivates them, what kind of world this is, and what kind of story I'm telling, I just allow for everything. I don't kind of close off any possibility.
So, I mean, if they are suddenly underwater, now of course you tend to write magical realism, so I can imagine they just magic themselves and they're fine underwater. But if that weren't the case and they needed to get breathing apparatus, scuba gear, all that stuff, would you then stop to do research at any point, or would you just keep going and do your research later? When is your research going to come in?
So it's kind of dotted throughout, but like you said, because I write fantasy, I don't write anything that I don't write like historical books that have to be very historically accurate, or books that involve a lot of like scientific research or anything like that. So I'm always researching, in the sense that I'm always gathering, kind of like a magpie. I'm always gathering things that are interesting to me, and they sometimes end up in a book, kind of by osmosis, or just not necessarily by me choosing for them to be there. But yeah, so if the characters had to be underwater and they were having a conversation, I would definitely pause and kind of ask myself, why are they underwater? I don't, what's going on here? But I would let myself write the scene. And then I usually let myself go all the way to the end of the draft. And then when I'm reading over, if that underwater scene is still there, and if it pops up a few more times, I might ask myself, okay, why are the characters underwater? What's going on here? Like, is the whole world underwater, or is it just one particular house that's underwater, or is there like a character that needs to be some kind of aquatic creature, or I don't know. It's more like a question of, sometimes when I'm drafting, I feel like I'm leaving like a trail of breadcrumbs for myself. And so then when I'm revising, like after I do a first draft, I'll go and read it, and I'm kind of looking for that trail of breadcrumbs to figure out what the story is about and who these characters are and what this world is. So I might write a whole draft, and there's just one underwater scene, and maybe I decide I don't actually want this to be in this book, and I'll take it out. But if the underwater thing keeps coming back, then I might be like, oh, well, maybe this book is supposed to be set underwater, or maybe one of the characters lives underwater, or maybe, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like it's just me kind of figuring out my own brain. Yeah.
But I mean, this is my own personal feelings coming in about how I work, because I'm a little bit more of a pantser, not firm 100%, but that it almost gives me heart palpitations to think, oh my God, you're going to rewrite the whole book so that it's all underwater. What a tremendous amount of work. How many drafts are you doing?
Yeah. It's not the most efficient way of writing. It really isn't. And I've tried to be more efficient.
It is working out very well for you, as we're going to talk about. We're on book number 2, but I'm sorry, continue.
Yeah, so it's not the most efficient way, and so I've tried to be more efficient, and I've tried to do detailed outlines and synopses and things like that. But I always find if I do a really detailed outline, firstly, there's the issue of I don't actually know what the story is. So how can I write an outline of something that I don't know? And I know it sounds weird, but I don't get ideas when I'm outlining. I get ideas when I'm actually in the writing, like in the flow of it, and I'm in the language. Very often something will happen in the language, like I'll just like smush 2 words together, and then I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, wonder root tree, that's a thing in this world, cool. And then later I have to figure out, oh, what is a wonder root tree? Why is it called that? What does it look like? And all of that. But it comes from the word, like out into the world, as opposed to me thinking, oh, I want a tree that floats, so I'm going to call it a wonder root tree. So I don't know. It's just the way that my brain comes up with ideas, and it's also the most fun way for me to write. So that's why I do it that way. But I don't necessarily recommend, writing like if I could not write, 200,000 words in order to find the 40,000 words that I actually need, that would be better. But at the same time, it's the way that my brain works.
It's I always try and catch myself anytime I've got a personal moment of oh my God, that would not work well for me. But I always say that the moment I do this show long enough that I have 2 authors tell me we always do this and we are successful every time, I'm going to stop the show and I'm just going to do that. And it has yet to happen because everybody works a little bit differently.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how many revisions are you gonna on a typical story? How many times are you taking 200,000 words down to 40?
Well, I don't write drafts that are 200,000 words. I'm more meant 200,000 words in total, like over. But yeah, I might write. I mean, to be honest, I kind of lose track of how many drafts I write because I'm also quite disorganized. I'm not the most organized person. So I just kind of throw myself into writing, and I write until I figured something out, and then sometimes I'll be kind of halfway in and I know that it's kind of wrong and I have to go back to the beginning, and sometimes I get all the way to the end, and there's some things I want to keep and other things I want to throw out. So yeah, it's anywhere from like 5 to 20 drafts of one story to figure out what the story actually is. I don't think I've done more than 20.
Okay. Yeah, that's about where I'm at usually, somewhere 20 to 30, and and I've got a nice outline too. So I don't think anybody avoids the pain of revision. Well, the pain and the joy.
Yeah. Well, I once listened to this interview with Kelly Barnhill. I think it's the one on 88 Cups of Tea. And she talks about doing 45 drafts of The Girl Who Drank the Moon.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, 45 drafts that's a lot of drafts, I would say. So yeah, if it works for Kelly Barnhill, then
Case closed. That's how we're all going to have to do it. Something that strikes me a little bit curious. Maybe it's not that much of a stretch, but we're talking. Esteemed audiences hearing how passionate you are about writing, how you enjoy almost every part of the process. But you had said on your bio that from at what age 2 you saw Pavarotti singing on TV and wanted to passionately be a singer until you got to university and switched. So when did that switch occur and why? And when did you know books were the thing, not the singing? Or are you doing both?
Yeah, so it was always. So writing was one of those, I think this is something that happens often with writers, that writing is such a kind of natural part of your life that you almost don't think it's a thing. Like you just think it's like breathing, or it's just ordinary to just write all the time. When of course it isn't ordinary for everyone. But yeah, I learned to read when I was 4. And I always loved reading and writing. I always had a journal, and I was always writing songs and poems and, journaling about things that happened in my day. And I tried to write stories when I was younger, but I would always get kind of anxious when I didn't know what was going to happen next. So I would like have the beginning part of a story, and then I would just stop because I didn't know how to continue, like how to write a long story that had a beginning and a middle and an end. So writing was always part of my life, but I also always, like you said, I always wanted to be a singer my whole childhood. And it changed. It was first like an opera singer, and then it was like I wanted to be like a singer-songwriter, or like a pop singer. But I loved singing, and I wrote music constantly. So what happened was I went to university to study music and just had a complete identity crisis because I did not fit in at music school at university. I don't know exactly what it was. I don't know if I was more like of a kind of songwriter more than like a performer. I do also have stage fright. I don't know if I would call it stage fright, but I get very anxious singing in front of people. I don't feel like alive and electric from it. I feel like just awful when I'm standing in front of people about to sing. So even though I still love singing, I'm much more comfortable kind of sitting in my office and writing songs and kind of recording myself on my computer and like making like vocal harmonies and things like that, without actually doing like performances or shows or anything like that. So I was at university doing music. I didn't do very well. I had like constant anxiety about crits and just having to do like all the theory, but I really loved doing like the essays, and I also had to take a language, and I took Italian, and I fell in love with that. So what I ended up doing is I just switched to a Bachelor of Arts, which is like a liberal arts degree, and I did Italian and English literature, and I threw law in there too because everyone was always like, well, what are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do with your degree? And I didn't have an answer. So if I took law as a subject, then I could be like, yeah, well, eventually I'm going to do a law degree, and then I'll be a lawyer, and then I'll put all this literature stuff to the side, and I'll be a responsible human. And then what happened was I was studying law, so I did the Bachelor of Arts degree, and then was doing a law degree afterwards. And it was at that time I kind of realized how important writing and reading was to me, and in particular reading and writing fiction, because I had no time suddenly to do that. I had to read so many cases and articles and just textbooks and reams of legal material, and I just didn't have time to read poetry or fiction anymore, and I didn't have time to write anymore, and I felt empty. I really felt like I was in the wrong place. I was going down the wrong path. So around that time, I did finish my degree, but I never went to work as a lawyer. I just decided I wanted to write books. And I kind of got funding to do a scholarship after that, so to just give me time to write. And I did kind of copywriting and like kind of part-time work and all sorts of cobbled together other kinds of work so that I could have time to write, because I knew that if I had a day job as a lawyer, if I'd gone to work in at a law firm, that I wouldn't have had time to write. Like working at a law firm is pretty much, 24/7. It's not the kind of job that you can kind of leave at the office. So yeah, that's the choice that I made, and that's kind of when I started trying to write books and trying to figure out how to write stories with beginnings, middles, and ends, instead of just writing beginnings and then abandoning them because I didn't know how to continue.
I was just thinking that if I had a lawyer that sat down and said, "Hey, man, I listened to the show. I always wanted to be a writer too," I'd say, "No, I'd like to get another lawyer. You have a nice day." I need somebody that's very focused on the law to handle my case. But did you find that all of that reading of things that you weren't interested in and pouring through things, did that help develop a skill that you could use for reading and writing the stuff that you did love, or was it just non-transferable?
It was interesting. I mean, I'm the kind of person, this has also kind of been a gift and a bit of a curse, is that I'm the kind of person who just likes learning about pretty much anything. And when I talk to people who are like, "Oh, I started doing this degree, and then I did that degree, and then I did this degree," I'm always like, you might be a writer, because that's how writers are. We like to read about all sorts of different things and then cobble them together and put them into stories. And so I didn't know that then, but I was interested in law more just because I was interested in learning and reading, than like actually practicing law. There's a big difference between reading legal cases and talking about the law and talking about things like human rights and international law, like really interesting, fascinating topics, versus actually working as a lawyer in an office. And I got a little taste of that because I did some work over one of the holidays where I had to kind of intern at a law firm, and I had a nice experience there, but I just knew that there was a difference between what I actually got out of it versus how that thing actually functions in the real world.
Makes sense. So, okay, so you decide, all right, law, we had a nice attempt, but that's not going to be for me. It's got to be the fiction. How do you go from that point then to your debut novel in 2018, the Turnaway Girls?
Turnaway Girls, yeah. How did I go from there? So that was it, from the time that I made that choice until the book coming out was 7 years. And so it was 7 years of basically teaching myself how to write a book, and how to write a story that had a structure to it. So I read loads and loads of books about how to write a book, and I also just started writing. So at that point also, part of the reason why I made this course, 100 Ideas in 10 Days, is that when I started writing, I was like, I really desperately want to write a book, but I have no idea what to write about. I had no sense of like my own like point of view, or my own, I don't know, like what I wanted to say, what was like interesting to me, what was inside me that I actually wanted to kind of bring out. So what I did was I just started writing, and I wrote lots of really boring stuff. And I actually thought that I wanted to write books for adults because that's what I've been reading. And I kind of thought that I wanted to write literary fiction. But I, like I said, I had no ideas basically. So I would just take a character and just write about them. And very often the manuscript, the story would be like someone sitting in a room thinking about their life, like reminiscing about their life, which is not very fun to read about, very exciting to read about. And I would get bored with myself. I was like, oh, this is terrible. Okay, throw it out, start again. So I just wrote, I think I just had like at that point, I just decided to do it. And I had such determination to do it. And I just was not going to give up until I figured out what it was that, what kind of story I was here to write and how to execute that. So I wrote a couple of manuscripts for adults, and then found myself, again, like that kind of trail of breadcrumbs. I noticed that children kept showing up in my stories. I kept having these young characters. And so I was like, okay, maybe I should write a book for children. I started reading lots of recently published middle grade and YA books. And then I wrote a couple of kind of books about kids, and they all had like magical elements. So I started noticing, oh, okay, cool, yeah, there's lots of magic going on. Like sometimes it was the real world with some kind of magical elements thrown in. Sometimes it seemed like a completely invented kind of second world fantasy. And so I started reading more and more fantasy too. And that's how I came to write the Turnaway Girls. And yeah, but it wasn't the first book that I queried. The first book I queried was actually a novel in verse, because I read this book called The Weight of Water by Sarah Crasson. It's this beautiful, beautiful book, a middle grade book, and every chapter is one poem, or every scene rather is one poem. And so it's all written in verse. And I thought, well, I can do that. Like, it's lower word count, and I've always written poems, and I love language, so let me try that. So I wrote this book in verse about an 11-year-old girl whose voice is stolen by this old man who lives in an old age home, like near her house. And so she has to go and find it, and she ends up having it, like, interacting with this man and figuring out why her voice has been stolen and how to get it back. And I queried that book, and I got a revise and resubmit on it, and was really excited to do the revisions, did the revisions, and then it ended up not being, like, the revisions weren't what the agent kind of wanted for the book or expected, and yeah, and it ended up being rejected. And yeah, so that was like quite disappointing, but also was such an amazing learning experience for me, because I got to query, I figured out how to pitch my book, I figured out how to revise and how not to revise, like how when you revise, you have to keep like the heart of the book there. If you revise the heart of the book away, it's just like a completely different book, which is actually still something that I kind of struggle with.
I've got a follow-up question, but I'll hold on to it.
Okay. Yeah, so I queried that book, and then after that rejection, I took a little bit of time to feel sad about it, but I had this other idea for the Turnaway Girls, and so that's when I started writing that book, and that's the book that I signed with my agent. I queried that book and signed with my agent, and then yeah, that became my debut book.
Of course, obviously, we're going to spend some time talking about the Sisters of Straygarden Place, which is available October 13th. So right after you're listening to this, esteemed audience, or if you've come along later, good news. There's no queue. You can get straight to it. But you mentioned you wanted to revise a book without revising the heart out of the book. How do you know what the heart of the book is, and how do you avoid surgically removing it?
Well, this is actually something that I struggle with to this day. But I think that what I try to do now is, before I revise, is I write a list of, it's kind of like a heart list, or like a list of all the things I love most in the book. And I try to keep that in mind when I'm revising. And then I guess the heart of the book would be like the thing at the center of it, like my agent has described it as like a crystal at the center of the story, that if you had to remove it, it would be a completely different story. So you can change everything around that crystal. You can change how you structure the book, or how, or like ornamental things about the world, or sometimes even like atmosphere. But if that heart of the book changes, then it becomes a totally different thing. So it's quite, I don't know, it's something that's really hard to pin down. But I do try to think about that beforehand, because so what I did with this revise and resubmit is I actually ended up rewriting the book in prose, which is like, hello, that takes out that changes the book completely, going from verse to prose. And then added in a whole bunch of other characters, it was just too much added to it. And I think that maybe was the thing that was kind of problematic about that revision, was that it just got too far away from its original form and what the agent originally loved about it. But if you're doing it for your own work, then yeah, making a list of the things that you think are really at the center of the book and that you love the most. And let's say, like for Straygarden, it's a book about sisters. So if I suddenly had to be like, oh, well, actually, no, it's just going to be one girl in a house on her own, like that would change everything about that story. You couldn't tell the same story without the sisterhood aspect. I don't know if that's explaining it properly. It is something that I still struggle with, to be honest.
Oh, is there maybe a famous book you could think of where we could remove the heart, where we can easily identify what the heart of it is? It's just like asking you an essay question on a test when you haven't prepared for it ahead of time. It might be cruel.
Well, okay, let me think. Okay, let's take Because of Winn-Dixie, because everyone knows that book by Kate Camillo. I love that book. So I think if you had to take out, like if you had to make that book about a girl who finds a dog in a shop and is like having to interact with people, like if you had to change her relationships with the other people in the town where she lives, and make them like overwhelmingly negative, or if you had to change like the ending of that book, or even take the dog out, let's say, and say it's a parrot, or I don't know, or make it so that like her parents are like she hasn't lost her mother, like she has both of her parents. That would change the story in a really big way. But if you had to have like a similar kind of, if you had to take that story and change the setting slightly, or change how the characters interact, or change how you get from one scene to another, then that's more of a change that can still keep the heart of the book intact. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I'm 100% on board with you. That makes sense.
Cool.
So, okay, and you mentioned your agent. That's Patricia Nelson, right?
Yes.
When did she come into the picture?
So midway through 2015, well, in the beginning of 2015, I started querying. Oh no, it was at the beginning. Let me just try and think. I started writing the Turnaway Girls at the end of 2014, and then I started querying in April of 2015, and then signed with Patricia in June, I think. And what happened is that she actually read the book and then gave me a revise and resubmit, or asked me if I wanted to revise and resubmit. And I said that I would. And she sent me like a list of books to read about story structure, including Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, which continues to be my favorite book about story structure, even though it's about screenwriting, not novel writing. And so I was doing that revise and resubmit for her. The book I'd also queried a handful of other agents. And then what happened was, while I was doing the R&R, I got an offer from one of the other agents. But I had this feeling, because of the interaction I'd had with Patricia, that I wanted to sign with her and that we would make a good team. Because of the notes that she'd given me and because of how we'd interacted, I just immediately felt comfortable with her. And I just had this kind of gut feeling, like this intuition, that she and I would make a good team. So I let her know that I had an offer, and she said to me, well, just send me like what you've revised so far. And I think by that stage I'd rewritten the entire manuscript, and I was like polishing it. So I sent her the first 3 chapters, I think, that were kind of readable. And she offered on that version of the manuscript. And so that's how we started working together. And it's funny because we still work like that together. I send her pitches for books, and she weighs in on kind of which book I should focus on. And I send her drafts, and she always sends me the most insightful notes. So we work together really, really well. And the gut feeling that I had back then has proven to be accurate.
Good. I love it when that works out. That's a big difference.
Yeah.
And I should shamelessly remind esteemed audience that Patricia Nelson was good enough to face the 7 questions, available now at middlegradeninja.com. Ms. Nelson, if you're listening, I would absolutely love to have you on the show sometime. You mentioned that you had a sense of her, so had you met her before you officially queried her, or did you pick her name out of a writer's market?
No, I hadn't met her. What happened was I actually entered a pitch competition on Twitter, and it was one of these things where you had to kind of submit your pitch and then like the first 500 words or something like that. And then it was like kind of a blog hopping situation. So they would put the authors who arranged the competition, they would put the pitches and a little excerpt on their blog. And then agents would comment if they wanted to see more of any of the books that were there. And so Patricia had commented on my pitch, which is why I sent her the manuscript. So fate intervened, because I actually hadn't queried her, like I hadn't thought to query her. I don't know why. I don't know, maybe she just hadn't come up in my research yet. but yeah, so I sent her the manuscript, and she read it and loved it, but wanted me to do some changes, and that's how our relationship started. And obviously, when an agent offers an R&R, they kind of send you an edit letter in a way. They send you like notes, and Patricia's amazing because she doesn't ever tell me like, this is how you should fix this. She's more saying there's a problem here, or like she can really see the bird's eye view of my book, and she can point out like the pacing is lagging here, or this isn't quite working, but she never says you should fix it like this. And so she gave me these kind of broad notes, and from her edit letter I could just tell that she really understood my book. She really understood my writing, and she was the kind of person who could help me to write better and to write the books that I really wanted to write. So yeah, it's worked out really well.
And then of course she went on to get you the first deal, and now she's kept you for your second book, and I'm assuming many more yet to follow.
We hope so, yes.
So without further delay, because I've got more questions for you about being a writing coach. We're definitely going to talk about flying saucers, because we always do on this show, all kinds of fun stuff. But before we get too far into this thing, I should mention that you have a book coming out again, The Sisters of Straygarden Place, October 13th. So man of my word, I won't summarize your biography, and I won't summarize your book, because I'll malign it terribly. Please tell us about The Sisters of Straygarden Place.
Cool. Okay, so The Sisters of Straygarden Place is a dark middle grade fantasy about three sisters who live in a magical house. It's a magical mansion, and it's absolutely beautiful, and it takes care of them. It makes them food, and it tucks them into bed at night, and it provides them with clothing and anything they might need. But what's happened is that their parents have left them there, kind of abandoned them to the care of this house. And their parents have said to them, don't leave the house, just wait till we get back. But that was 7 years ago. And the other thing you have to know about the house is that it's surrounded by this really tall silver grass. And so the parents have also said, don't leave the house, don't go walking in the grass, we'll come back. And what happens is the eldest sister, Winnow, goes out into the grass, and she returns, and she seems okay. But very quickly after that, she starts to get sick. And so the middle sister, Mayhap, has to figure out why she's getting sick, why she left in the first place. And as she's trying to figure that out, she discovers things about the house and things about her parents and things about herself that change everything that she kind of thought she knew about her life.
It's the perfect story to be read during quarantine. For COVID-19, because you can't go outside if you do.
It's a quarantine book.
And then I wanted to ask, well, when you're writing a book like this, where you've got a mystery, especially knowing that I'm assuming pantsed it originally and then rewrote it until everything was consistent. When you're dealing with did you know the mystery of without spoiling, where the parents have been off to when you started, or did you find it out along with the characters?
No, I didn't. I didn't know anything. Well, okay, so how it started was I had this image in my mind of these sisters sleeping in a bed. They were all sleeping in one bed together. And I wanted to write about them. I thought they were interesting. I wanted to figure out, who they were and what story they belonged in. It was a really compelling image to me, and I kind of knew that they loved each other deeply, but they also had like a really complicated dynamic. And so I started writing about them, and in the beginning they were in a completely different story. Because I just kind of started throwing ideas at them, like, oh, maybe they're in this kind of a situation, and maybe it's very snowy, or maybe it's this and maybe it's that. And I just started writing. And it took me a number of drafts. I don't know how many, because I don't really keep track, but it took me a number of drafts to figure out that the situation that they were in the sense that their parents had abandoned them into this house. And then as I was writing, then the silver grass kind of came up. And then, it happened on one day, and I remember it actually quite vividly. I write really, really early in the morning sometimes when I'm trying to draft and trying to figure something out. And I wrote this scene where I figured out why they were in the house and like what was actually going on. And it's always such an amazing feeling to figure it out. It's like this, I don't know, like it's like the universe is speaking to you, or like some kind of like being from outer space is speaking to you. It always feels really like, it just gives me this feeling of elation and like it's like things clicking together. But yeah, so I figured that out, and then it was a matter of going back and planting all the clues and making sure that like the beginning of the book, you know, hinted at the final mystery at the end, or the reveal at the end.
Makes might not make sense to non-writers, but let's be honest. Why aren't non-writers listening to this wonderful writer show for writers? But that I know 100% what you mean. That moment when the universe opens up, it's almost like seeing God. Like, oh, there you are. I've been dealing with all this atheist reality over here, where there was nothing magical, and there it is.
Yeah, exactly. Also, the other thing I have to say is that this book has creatures in it called drumhunts, and they are little black dogs. Because the other thing I didn't say about the sisters is that they're cursed with insomnia. So every time they close their eyes, they get this like really painful white kind of noise in their head. And so these little dogs, they're called drumhunts, and they sleep inside they climb into their minds and sleep there so that they can close their eyes and have the feeling of being asleep, if even actually sleep. So, and the reason why that happened, well, that just happened spontaneously in a draft. There were these little dogs. I really liked them. I thought they were cool. And I realized, oh, they're sleeping inside their heads. There's this insomnia aspect. And then when I was trying to figure out the plot of the book, one of the things I did was I was like, okay, so there's this magic where they have these creatures who are sleeping in their minds. And I thought to myself, what could go wrong with this? Like, what could go wrong with this magical house and these creatures and these sisters? And sometimes that's a really interesting way into a story. If you have a magic system, is to ask, like, what could go wrong? What if this magic system went bad? Like, what's the dark side of it? So that was another thing that helped me figure out the plot. But it really was like just draft after draft of being in the scenes with these characters and watching things unfold in a way. It's like watching yourself dream and going, oh, okay, yeah, I want to keep that. I want to keep that. I don't want to keep that. And then asking lots of questions about what's going on in the story.
So this isn't a conscious metaphor for anything, and where you said, "Oh, this is the thematic significance of this." This is just, it's coming to you, and even scarier for me, because I find that that's going to reveal a bigger piece if you don't have a conscious plan, because that subconscious is going to come up and bring up whatever's going on in your life, right? I assume.
That's true. Yeah, that is very true. I've never thought about it that way. But I also think that there's a kind of safety in writing fiction because, yeah, even though it's very personal and it's very much about your life and what's going on in your mind and in your heart and what you've experienced, it's also about other people. So you can always be like, that's not me. That's this character. But yeah, of course, even writing magical books, yeah, there's a like an autobiography to it, or an element of like it's personal. It's not filtered.
Do you are you an only child, or do you have siblings?
I have siblings. I have 3 sisters.
Oh, how does that work out?
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm not really a middle sibling because there are 4 of us, but I am the second eldest. So in a way, I am kind of the middle child because my younger sisters are very close in age. So it's kind of like the elder sister and then me and then the 2. We used to call them the babies for the longest time. The babies. We can't call them that anymore because they're nearly 30. So.
And so you thought cleverly making 4 sisters into 3 would throw everyone off the trail. Like, nope, this can't be. And then with a magical system in place like this, at some point you've got to clamp down and say, these are the rules of my universe. When does that happen? Do you just let everything fly where it may, draft 1, and then fix it draft 2, or when do you create your rules?
Yeah, it's quite late on in the process because I like to keep everything quite free when I'm figuring out what the story is about and what kind of what I really like. Like I really tend to just add things in that I find fun and beautiful. But yeah, it does get to a point where you have to go, okay, so these creatures are sleeping in their minds. How does that actually work? You know, can they just enter their minds at any point, or is it this, or is there like choice involved, or is it at this particular time, and where did they come from, and you know, all of that stuff. And so it's kind of an ongoing process. Like I said, I'm quite disorganized. There isn't I don't go like, I'm going to draft and have all this mess and then I'm going to make everything neat. It's more like make a mess and then neaten it up a bit, and then make a mess again and then neaten it up a bit. So yeah, it's kind of ongoing, where I'm thinking about kind of how to, how the rules work, or how how things kind of fit into the world and timelines, and you know, all the like the nitty gritty of like, well, she said this at this point, so she kind of said that at that point. And then even sometimes in copy edits, you know, my copy edits or my editor will be like, well, you said this on page 5 and this on page 15, and then I have to make a choice. But sometimes I leave the choice to quite late, maybe just because I don't like making choices. I don't know.
Yes, you yell at the copy editor because you can't yell at yourself or not. That's the choice.
Yeah.
I'm always grateful and furious when somebody finds a crucial thing. That I'm always glad. Hey, I'm glad you found it before this thing is out there. Let's make sure it's straight. But also, dang it, I was feeling so good about myself, and now I have to admit that I've made this mistake.
Yeah, it always kind of stings, doesn't it? You're like, I thought I covered everything. I thought I figured this out.
And then it fills you with dread because, oh my God, we're this late in the process, and you found that. What else is there? Look,
yeah.
Oh, search.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And something else I noticed about this book is you've got very intricate prose. You don't need me to tell you this. I know that you've been praised pretty roundly for your prose because you've written such beautiful lyrical sentences, and you've really taken the time to look at the world and write descriptions that I don't think I've quite read exactly this way elsewhere. How much time are you spending on your prose, and when in the process are you doing that? Is that like draft 5, draft 20 type stuff, or?
That's a really interesting question. I think that I kind of let the prose lead me pretty much from the beginning. So when I'm having a bad day, it's usually when the prose isn't working, not in terms of everything being really neat, but in terms of like there being some magic or spark or rhythm in the prose that I can follow. So I think it's actually a thing that I think about throughout when I'm drafting, and then of course in revisions and line edits, I'll be kind of going over every sentence, making sure that it sounds right, like it has to have the right sound to the ear. And I think that maybe that's connected to having a musical background, is that like words, like I wrote songs for, you know, basically my whole childhood and my whole adolescence into my 20s. So language and music are always kind of like together for me. And so when you're writing prose, you don't want it to be too like da-da-da-da-da-da, you know, like too musical. But it needs to sound good. And yeah, and I can hear if it sounds good or if it sounds, I don't know, off or bad. So that's in line edits. I usually do, you know, I read over every sentence like obsessively out loud, and I also read back. Like I'll read the book from the end to the beginning, not the sentence backwards, but from the last chapter to the first chapter, just to see if I can catch anything that isn't working. But yeah, like language is so important to me. It's so fascinating to me and so beautiful to me, and I always want to play with language, and just like that's like the joy of writing to me, is to start a sentence and just see where it leads and where it can go. So yeah, it's pretty much constant. I'm constantly thinking about the language.
And then does anybody give you feedback on the book before? I assume it goes off to Patricia Nelson at some point, but before that, do you have critique partners, anybody else that steps in and gives you that feedback?
I do have critique partners. Yeah, I have a handful of really lovely critique partners, and it's even nice just to have, when you're drafting, to have kind of cheerleaders. I don't always have like I think my group of critique partners, I don't know if this is like the same for everyone, but we're very encouraging of each other's work. And so sometimes it will be a case of, like, oh, I just don't know if this book is working, or it just feels like flat or boring to me. And then we'll kind of send extracts back and forth and just like tell each other, like, no, this is really good, you need to keep going, or like, this isn't quite working, or the beginning's a bit slow, but it's very broad. It's usually very broad feedback, not really like line edit level or sentence level feedback.
Gotcha. So that gets saved for Patricia, and then eventually your editor.
Yeah.
Do we want to shout out your editor?
Yeah, my editor is Miriam Newman at Candlewick Press, and she's amazing.
And also welcome on the show. Here's it's my laziest question, but it's also one of my favorites. Because I always try to do this show. If I were on somebody's show, how would I want that interview to go? And I would want someone to leave open a spot for me to say whatever I want esteemed audience to know about the book. So my lazy question is, what is a question no one has asked you about this book, but that you'd love to answer it? And once you've identified the question, please answer it.
What is a question that no one's asked me? I'm really lucky, actually, because I've gotten lots of really fascinating questions about it. But I guess maybe I haven't spoken extensively about how much music is such a huge part of my process. So when I write a book, I usually choose one song. I didn't actually do this consciously, but I realized with the Turnaway Girls, I was listening to one song on repeat for months. And so with Straygarden, I found one song, and I also just listened to it pretty much on repeat while I was drafting. And then some other music.
The song, or is it too personal?
No, it's okay. It's Tori Amos. I think the song is called Mother.
Yes. Yes,
yeah.
I'm a huge Tori Amos fan. Yes, Anastasia has been the theme song for a couple of my stories. You are speaking my love language. Yes, go on, Mother.
Cool. Yeah, so I listened to that over and over and over, and like, I don't know if it's the lyrical content. It probably isn't. I don't know what it is. It's just something about the vibe of the song, the feeling of the song, that it's almost like a doorway that you can just, like, sometimes music to me feels like that. Like, it's just this doorway into the story. If I'm struggling to get there, or if I just feel like things are feeling flat, or I can't access something, then I put on music and it feels like I'm there. It's like a portal to the story. So yeah, and I also listened to the score for the first and the second season of The Crown. I don't know if you like that show. I'm obsessed with that show.
Never seen the show. Love the soundtrack.
Cool. Yeah, the soundtrack is so good. Exactly. So and I love instrumental music for writing, because it just has this immediate sense of atmosphere, and that soundtrack, or score rather, it has this feeling of like foreboding, and I don't know, it has like a sumptuous kind of feeling, which I really liked. So yeah, I use music a lot when I'm drafting, not so much when I'm revising, because then I feel like I need silence, especially when I'm reading things over and over. But if I want to fast draft a scene and I feel hesitant, or I don't know, or scared, or a bit blocked, then music always helps me to get going.
You made me nervous a little bit up front with your wild, abandoned pantsing, but now we've come back and we're on the same page. Yes, listening to Tori Amos and feeling the story, I know exactly what you mean. Because you're the first person to bring up Tori Amos on the show, and she's been just a huge part of my life since adolescence. I discovered her and have been listening to her since. I find that one thing I like about her is how ambiguous so many of the lyrics to her songs are. And I've learned not to ever listen to interviews with her, because if she explains what a song of hers is actually about, it gets in my way. Like, no, don't tell me the actual thing the song's about. I've already invented a thing that I think is much better for your song, frankly.
So funny. Yeah, well, I often tell writers to use songs as like an idea. If you don't have a book idea, start with the song lyric. Obviously, you're not going to keep the song lyric in there like as you revise, but start with something and imagine, like, if this song were a story, what would it be about? Exactly what you're saying. Yeah, and I think that with Tori Amos, I agree. I think she has like a very there's something kind of otherworldly about her and about her music. It's just so, I don't know, there's something kind of magical about it, and I agree. It almost feels like each song is a story, but you wouldn't know just from reading the lyrics what the story is. Like, it could be 1,000 different stories.
Oh, when I found out the lyrics to Raspberry Swirl were kind of a dirty pun, I was like, oh, that makes it less fun.
Yeah.
Don't define your songs for me. Let me discover them. I assume Tori Amos listens every week, so this will be extremely useful to her.
I'm sure she's a huge fan.
Getting back to what you tell writers, because you are a writing coach. So how does that work? What kind of services as a writing coach are you providing?
Well, I'm quite new at being a writing coach, but what I do is I try to figure out. Usually, I have a conversation with writers in the beginning where I talk about, where they tell me kind of what's working for them and what isn't working for them, and we try to kind of work on the stuff that isn't working, like how we can get it to work. So if that's like feeling a lot of resistance to working or procrastinating, or if it's like I can't come up with ideas, or I don't know how to write a whole book, like I don't know how to sustain a story over the course of a novel, an entire novel, or my characters are feeling flat, or whatever it is, then I kind of tailor it to what that particular writer is going through. And so what we do is I have a weekly session with them, which is like a Zoom session, and we chat for an hour. And then after that, I send them notes from our chat, and then also exercises for the following week. And then we check in the next week after they've done the exercises that I set for them. And the exercises will be targeted based on what they're struggling with. But yeah, I'm not the best writing coach for every writer, but I think for people who write intuitively and who are pantsers, who feel anxious about pantsing, I'm a pretty good person to have in your corner, because I know what it feels like to be anxious about pantsing, and I also have created a lot of strategies for myself to get going, even when I feel stuck or I don't know what's going to happen next, or I need to like come up with an idea. And like I said, in the beginning of my writing career, when I decided I wanted to be a novelist, I really felt like I didn't know what to say. And so I really love working with writers to help them to find their voices. The thing with writing is that no one can tell you what to do. No one can tell you what your stories are or what your voice sounds like. You have to discover it for yourself. So having a coach is kind of like just having a guide along that journey, so that you don't feel alone and you don't give up, so that you can actually get there and get to a point where you start to have more confidence and you start to kind of know yourself as a writer.
So obviously that involves all kinds of personalized things that will come up in an individual situation that we can't hope to touch on in a podcast. On the other hand, anytime I can get a little taste for free, I'm interested. So let's say I come to you and I'm anxious. I'm not able to write every day. For whatever you come up with the reason why I can't write every day, and then tell me how we might address that specific problem, and we'll still leave plenty of secrets that people will need to come and pay money for.
Cool. Okay, so what I would say is I would ask you, why do you feel like you have to write every day?
Because I want to be a professional, famous author.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, so the thing with writing is that there is this idea that you have to write every day. And certainly in the beginning, when you're forming the habit of writing, it really helps to say, I'm going to check in every single day, even if it's just for 10 minutes. So I would say if you're struggling to write every day, it's probably because you're setting a very high standard for yourself. You're probably thinking, I have to write 3,000 words every day, or I have to write for an hour or 45 minutes every day. And to make it lower stakes for you, I would say if you want to write every day, get a timer of some kind, like an egg timer, or use the timer on your phone, and tell yourself that every day at a particular time, usually first thing in the morning, if that works for you. Usually first thing is much easier for people because it's like you get it off your to-do list first thing. But set aside 10 minutes a day and put your timer on. Have some kind of prompt or something that you're going to start with, so that you're not just staring at a blank page, and just write for 10 minutes, just 10 minutes. And then once you've done that, if you're feeling energized and you feel like you can continue and you want to do another 10 minutes or another 20 minutes, then that's awesome. But if you don't, then you've done that 10 minutes and you can tick that off, and you can feel a sense of like achievement and confidence, and that you've given time to this thing that's really, really important to you. So yeah, a couple of things help if you're struggling with that resistance. Timers, doing things first thing in the morning when you have a lot of energy still, or a lot of I mean, the thing is, it's particular to every person. So if you're the kind of person who gets a lot of creative energy in the evening, then of course do it in the evening. But if you wake up and you do something first thing in the morning, you're telling yourself, this is important to me. I'm committed to this thing. If you do your writing after you've answered emails, watched YouTube, I don't know, done a whole bunch of other things, then often you feel really depleted by the time you get to the writing. So find a time that works for you and use a timer and just break it down into really, really tiny steps. If you only want to write 100, if you can only kind of write 50 words or 100 words a day, that adds up. You don't have to spend 3 hours writing in order to call it like a good writing day.
But don't I have to tweet and update YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and all those things that are going to share that this is the post that'll make me a famous author?
Well, the most important thing about being an author, as you know, is writing your books. So if you don't have any books to promote, then, then that's not going to be good. So you need to write the books. And like obviously social media it's wonderful to be able to connect with people on there and share things, but it also, you compare yourself to other writers, or you get, I don't know, like dread and anxiety, and you see an article about something horrible that's happened in a distant land, and you feel terrible about it. And all of that stuff is taking away energy that you could use for your writing. So if something's a priority to you, definitely do it before Twitter, I would say.
Unfortunately, I'm in the United States, so these days all the terrible things are happening right here.
That's true. I'm so sorry. Hopefully that will change soon.
Okay. Hayley Chewins, have you ever seen a flying saucer and or a ghost?
I have never seen a flying saucer or a ghost, but my Oma, my grandmother on my mom's side, has so many ghost stories. I feel like she's the person who she has like second sight or something. She has lots of ghost stories, and she's seen a UFO, but I have never seen one. It's very sad.
Well, you need to spend more time with her and go where she goes when she's seeing the cool stuff.
Well, it all happened before I was born, so she doesn't see ghosts anymore, I don't think. I should ask her if she's seen one recently.
Ask her where she's seeing it. Go with her. I haven't seen a flying saucer either. It's on my bucket list. So anytime I hear of somebody that's seeing them pretty regular, okay, where are you going? I'm coming.
Well, I have a friend who's seen one, and she's actually writing a middle grade book about these UFOs that come to Earth, and like all the people suddenly disappear except this one girl and her dog. And so you should have her on the podcast because she will talk to you about flying saucers. Absolutely.
Let's make this happen.
Cool.
You are invited. And I'll gather her information from you after that. That sounds like a very promising lead. That's how we get our best stories, our best interviews. Watching our time, and I know it's flying away. I guess it always does. We get to talking about writing and Tori Amos and all my favorite things, and then oh my God, what happened to our time? So looking toward winding down, I wanted to ask you a bit about marketing, and then I'll have one more question for you, and we'll call it a day. But you've got a newsletter. You are on social media. It's not everything that you're doing, but you do have a very distinct presence. And then, of course, you're facing the same challenge as writers around the world right now in quarantine for pandemic while you're launching your book. So what are you doing to effectively market and keep yourself out there during this time?
Well, I'm doing podcasts like this, where I get to do the most fun thing ever, which is talk about writing and hopefully talk about my books in some way. And yeah, social media. I do have a newsletter. What else am I doing? I'm planning to put together some giveaways for the next week, like the week. What is today? Today's the 4th of October. Yeah, so it's like 9 days till the book comes out. So in the next week, I'm gonna have a giveaway on Twitter, so people should look out for that. I also do library research outreach in South Africa, so just with local librarians. I try to go to all different schools and contact them and chat to them. Obviously, I haven't been able to do that during the pandemic. I try to do school visits also. I do school visits on Skype with schools all over the world. So yeah, that's the stuff that I do. I'm not a marketing expert though. I'm much better at writing the books than marketing the books. But yeah, I try to do my part because obviously when you write a book, you really want people to read it and you want to tell people about it. And I guess the best way to do that is just to talk about how excited you are about it and just to tell people about it. And what more can you do?
I don't know, but when I find out, I'm going to do it. My last question, thank you so much for making the time. I know we had to reschedule a few times. We've been looking forward to this since way back when. It has lived up to all my excitement and more. This has been just a wonderful conversation. Thank you for being such an excellent guest. But my final question for most everyone is usually some version or some variation of, if you could go back to the start of your writing career and give yourself one or two or however many pieces of advice you like that would have made your path going forward much easier. It might make the path of everyone listening much easier. What would you go back and tell yourself?
I would tell myself to write fantasy, to write magical books, because right in the beginning, I was writing really realistic stories. And even today, if I try, like I recently had a book idea and I was like, well, it would be interesting if I set this in the real world and it could be like some magic, but also real world elements. And I kind of brainstormed it and I figured out, like after a while, I just didn't feel excited about it. I don't know why, but I'm not built to write about the real world. I love reading about it. And I think there are some writers who do it so, so well and who really translate like realistic experience, human experience into prose. But I'm not one of those writers. And I kind of wish I'd known that earlier on, because then I wouldn't have spent a couple of years trying to write realistic stories and not knowing like why I couldn't make it work. Because as soon as I made the switch to writing more magical, speculative work, something really changed in my writing. Like I just got better ideas and I was able to push through and I was able to write more interesting stories. And I was more excited about the stories. But I also had this thing, so I think it was because I had never really been a huge fantasy reader. Like growing up, obviously I read like Narnia and things like that, but I didn't read Tolkien until I was 21, I think. And it also felt like, I guess I kind of felt like, well, I'm not going to write something like Lord of the Rings. I wasn't plugged into like this fandom or like this culture of writing like second world fantasy. So I had a lot of imposter syndrome about it. I didn't know if I could do it. And I kind of felt like, is that really for me? Like, can I actually do it? So yeah, I think I would go back and just say, don't worry about it. Just write magical stories the way that you write them, and it'll be okay. And that's what I always say to writers is write the stuff that makes you excited, write the stuff that you love, write the stuff that fascinates you, and you'll be okay.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. I also think we got a little bit more free writing coach, so yes. Stuck that in there before the end. Where can esteemed audience find you online, get more information about you, your books, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so I'm at HayleyChewins.com, and on Twitter I'm Hayley_Chewins. I don't have Instagram, and yeah, you can join my newsletter if you want to. It's on my website. If you want to get regular updates from me, yeah, that's pretty much where I am. Thank you so much for having me, Rob. This has been amazing. I've loved our conversation. It's been so fun.
Well, when you get your next book, come back and tell me what Tori Amos song you were listening to while you wrote it. Well, tell me up front, and I'll listen to it while I read it, and we'll both have that experience.
I'll do that.
As always, esteemed audience, for interviews with hundreds of literary agents, authors, publishing professionals, head to middlegradeninja.com. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. Listen to Under the Pink by Tori Amos. And God willing that I'm alive, I'll see you next week.